Hey everyone, this is the short lecture on Russell and the selection in the textbook from his book Why I Am Not a Christian. Um, in case you couldn't tell, the point of Russell's work is to argue against the existence of God. He is not a Christian, he does not believe in God. And what he's going to do in this piece is offer 5 arguments that other people have given for the existence of God, and then explain why he thinks they're bad arguments. So when you see an argument like the first cause argument, for example, it's not because Russell believes it or wants you to believe it. It's because he's just explaining it first and then explaining it in order to shut it down. So the first cause argument is the first of 5, and we'll talk about that now. The first cause argument is something that we saw in Aquinas. It's the idea that every event has a cause, and the causes themselves have causes, and so there's a chain of causes going all the way back to some place, and the chain can't go on forever, so it's got to start somewhere, and that starting place is God. Now, Russell thinks this is a bad argument because you can always ask what caused God. God needs to have a cause, right? So if God needs to have a cause, then you don't explain anything by saying that God started the series. In fact, it just raises the further question about what caused God. So positing God's existence doesn't help at all. On the other hand, if you say God doesn't need a cause, then it means that some things don't need to have causes, and we might as well say that the universe doesn't need a cause. So the universe just exists, and that's it. The second argument is the natural law argument. And this argument starts from the idea that the universe, or the world as it is, has laws, like laws of physics, laws of nature, that kind of thing. Well, if it has laws, the argument goes, then someone had to make those laws, and that was God. God made the laws. Russell thinks that this argument is bad because if God had some reason to make these laws rather than some other set of laws, then God is subject to some kind of law, right? He's responding to something if he says this set of laws is better than this other set of laws. So that means that there's some further law that God is responsible to, and again, we don't explain anything by proposing that God exists. Okay, the third argument is the argument from design, and this is something that we saw in Paley. It's the idea that the world is intricate and magnificent, and it's totally suited to living organisms and us in particular. So someone must have designed it, just like if we find some intricate mechanism somewhere, like a watch on the ground, like Paley says, we would infer that there's a designer to it. And Russell has 2 responses to this, 2 reasons why he thinks that this is a bad argument. The first is that we know, thanks to Charles Darwin and later people, that there's a process called evolution by natural selection. And this means that the reason the world is so suitable to organisms is because organisms adapted to it over time, not because they were created that way or that the world was created that way. So we don't need to infer a designer from the existence of the intricate mechanisms of the living world. The second reason that Russell thinks this is bad is that if you think about it, the world, if it were designed, looks like it's pretty poorly designed. There's all kinds of bad things in it. Like, what kind of God would design a world that had the Ku Klux Klan or the fascists? And you can think of any number of other things that are bad or wrong about the world. And you might think, well, if someone designed the world, why would they design it that way? So those are the 2 reasons Russell thinks the argument from design is bad. The fourth argument is the moral argument. And this one begins by saying, we all know the difference between right and wrong, good and bad, and in order for there to be a difference between those things, then there has to be a God that made the things right or wrong, or made them good or bad. And this is an old idea, and it's actually addressed in one of Plato's dialogues called the Euthyphro. And the response that Russell gives to this argument is exactly the response that we get in the Euthyphro. So it goes like this. You can always ask about good or bad things, for example. You can ask, are the good things good because God approves of them, or does God approve of them because they're good? And you have 2 options there, right? If it's the first thing, if good things are good because God approves of them, then God is approving of them not on the basis of good or bad, right? Because he makes them good or bad. God is approving of them just on some kind of whim or something like that. It makes God look arbitrary. He's not responding to good or bad. He himself is not good or bad. Instead, he's creating goodness and badness. So if that's the case, then you can't really say that God is good, because good and bad don't even apply to God. On the other hand, if you take the second route, the idea that God approves of good things because they're good, well, then he's recognizing the goodness in things, right? He's responding to some goodness that is not in him or from him, but they're already good, and then God responds to them that way. So in either case, we don't really explain why there's good or bad by proposing that God exists. Finally, the fifth argument that Russell addresses is the argument for the remedying of injustice. And this argument just begins by observing the world around us and looking at all the injustice there is in the world. The world seems to have all kinds of good people being punished and bad people being rewarded, and you can think of all kinds of examples, I'm sure, of just ordinary and extraordinary injustice in the world. According to the argument for the remedying of injustice, God has to exist to balance the scales, to make things just. And he does this by basically making things right in the afterlife. Russell's response to this is that we really have no reason to believe that God does this. We have no evidence that justice must be done, and in fact we have lots of evidence that the world itself is pretty much unjust all the time, and that's the normal state of things. So this argument, he thinks, holds no water because we have no reason to believe that there must be justice done and that God does the justice. That is the 5 arguments from Russell, and that's the end of this video.